Singapore. She's also an Horyou, sorry, not in Singapore, in Osaka. She is also an ambassador for Horyou in Japan. We're also joined by Prasanna De Silva, who is the formerly of World Vision, the incoming head of the WWF for the APAC region. Simon Schillebeeks is an assistant professor at the Singapore Management University. Simon, where are you? And finally we have Arndt Huzar, who is very recently of the UNDP, who hopefully will have some inside gossip on what's happening at the UN and all the Sustainable Development Goals. Panel, thank you very much for being with us. Please take a seat. So you're all aware the Sustainable Development Goals followed on from the Millennium Development Goals, which, with a little bit of smoke and mirrors, was put to bed and deemed a success a couple of years ago. The SDGs now form the framework for how we, as individuals, as businesses principally, will interact with the idea of sustainability and social responsibility into the future. The question is, will they? Will they work? Are they working? How are they being implemented? What are they doing? Mikhail, let me begin with you. Just give us a broad overview perspective of the SDGs, their applicability, their feasibility, their functionality as we stand right now.
Thank you very much. So I'll tell you about how we've been thinking in DBS about the SDGs and how they can direct our efforts in sustainability and actually driving our business. So a little bit of background in DBS. Assuming most of you know us, but we're one of the largest banks in Southeast Asia. And the first obvious question to ask is, well, what does the bank have to do with sustainability and how does it fit in? Because you'd be forgiven for thinking that, you know, the environmental impact of our direct impact is about whether we switch on the light at night. But obviously, as a financial institution, money is at the core of many things. So who we lend to, what we do, who we choose not to lend to has a very big impact. So for us, we have been wrestling with the ideas about how can we use the SDGs to direct, as I said, our business here. And we thought about the idea that which one can we actually make the biggest impact on as a bank? Through our lending, through our voice in Singapore with a large consumer base, and by being a leader in certain areas, including gender equality. So we picked initially 4, and then we expanded into 6. And what that does for us, effectively, it allows us to decide not only what we do, but also what we don't do. Because we could donate to many, many things, but it isn't obvious why a bank like us would, for example, tackle things like obesity. So we have chosen a mix of social issues and environmental issues. And for those of you who are familiar with the numbers, because it will take too long to write up, they are 5, 7, 8, 9, 12, and 13, which has as a mix of responsible consumption and production on one side, more socially slanted, and climate change on the other side. How does it work for us? We don't necessarily see the SDGs as a framework for setting targets. It's more around spotting opportunities. So we have gone through that exercise and lengths, and what we do now is we use a simple 80-20 rules. Of our efforts that we do, 80% will be directed towards those 6. So I think I'll just stop with that as an introduction. I don't know if that was broad picture, but it was helpful. Hopefully
we'll pick up some of those themes.
Yeah.
But Arndt, I mean, as a former UN guy, I know that doesn't necessarily make you an expert in all things UN, but from within the organization's perspective, how much hope was there that the SDGs would galvanize the sustainability movement?
Well, I think there is still a lot of hope that we can pick up more momentum. This framework was launched 3 years ago, and we have 15 years total time to implement the SDGs. This is a completely different agenda from the previous one, and I want to just name a few reasons why it's different. One, it concerns every country in the world. The previous framework was only aimed at developing countries. Now every country has to report against it. That brings people on board that previously felt like they had to do nothing more than give money. And it also involves a larger group of stakeholders. So there is a specific outreach to the private sector, to civil society to come on board and pull the weight. governments alone will never be able to implement or let alone finance the achievement of the 2030 agenda. So it's a departure from what was there previously. The other aspect to this framework is that it's hugely complex. 17 goals, 169 targets, and many more indicators to measure. This is a complex framework.
There's a lot of reading involved in these.
Indeed, and a lot of complicated negotiations about how to measure, because countries also are protective of their own frameworks and policies and want to achieve these goals. Therefore, there's a lot of negotiation about what should be measured. So once that was all in place, this complex framework, which I think more truly reflects the complexity of reality, because we have a really complex problem to solve, that is development. Once you acknowledge that, you have to change your mindset about how you tackle it. And that means a lot of change is required within government. And that used to be my area of work in the UN. Governments need to become much more facilitators for change rather than administrators.
I want to come on to that role of how governments need to behave and how they are actually behaving in practice in a second, because I think that's a key point. But just to that element of the complexity of it, Prasanna, let me put this to you. I mean, I guess there are two sides to the equation, as Mikkel pointed out. Some of the corporations look at this and they go, okay, we'll pick out the ones that are relevant to us. But is the detail in itself not useful insofar as it does allow engagement at every level? So companies and individual organizations can engage with them in some form or another. They can't just sort of say, well, this doesn't apply to me. From the non-profit sector, tell me how these issues play out in your thinking.
Sure. I mean, if you really look at from a number point of view, 766 million people in the world lives less than $2 a day, and out of that, 43% of that lives in Asia Pacific. Now, when you have such level of acute poverty and such level of, economic poverty is a small indicator. So I believe it's quite important to have a very collaborative approach in terms of dealing with some of these most complex challenges. There used to be a time that, for example, NGOs, such as ourselves even, I would think you could resolve everything by yourself, and then you have finance, you have funds, some people have given you, entrusted you. But over the period of time that I think there's a real genuine shift is happening. You need to work closely with the government. You need to work very closely with the private sector and academia. I believe SDG has given that framework where all can sort of come together and then focus on, it has given some focus. Now, and also I believe some governments has taken SDG very seriously, and then they have made tremendous progress. Bangladesh government is one. I believe Sri Lankan government has made some progress. But each time that we have seen tremendous progress being made, you can see one thing, the facilitation role, and also not only rely on your government power, your authority, but to see that all the other players comes and then work with you. So I believe the success is in SDGs. People always talk about quick wins, low-hanging fruits. I believe there is no more low-hanging fruits. I believe there is maybe a little here and there, maybe quick wins, but all are now high-hanging fruits. You need to work hard. It's not just the sprint, it's a marathon. So as a sector, I believe we need to come together and then work together. So there is more importance of not having only the financial resources, but collective power, intellectual ability, technology, and government would make us successful.
That key theme of collaboration keeps coming up, and the ideas of the extent to which everyone recognizes collaboration, and then the extent to which people actually do practice collaboration is an interesting question, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it from everybody. But first of all, Simon, from the perspective of academe, how do the SDGs look, both in theory and in practice?
I don't think I can speak from the perspective of academia. I can speak from my own perspective. And I mean, if you look at Asia, just the way Asia is right now, about 60% of the global population, the factory of the world where most of production happens. And the reality of things is that 37 out of the 57 SDG targets are failing in Asia. This is the reality. Climate change.
It's been 3 years out of 15. Can you say that?
But I mean, we're going backwards. Like climate change, biodiversity are the two biggest market failures, social failures, governmental failures of the last decades, potentially centuries. And the SDGs as a framework have been very powerful, I think, in spurring action. But as many people have been saying before, here on the platform and during the morning session, the advantage of the SDGs is that every organization, every individual can pretty much cherry pick the ones that they say, this is what we want to work on because this is in our strategic interest, this is what we think we can contribute to, and which spurs action and we creates all this enthusiasm. The downside of that is that the assumption seems to be that the SDGs are 17 things that we can just choose, and there are no priorities being set at a higher level. While the external reality of things is that we should prioritize some over others. And this is an extremely difficult conversation to have. I personally, I'm an ecological fundamentalist. I believe that climate change is the one and most important challenge facing humankind. And as a consequence, the fact that that is SDG 13, although there is not really an order, but it's still number 13 and not number 1, I think is problematic. And so I think we're, with the SDGs as a framework, no matter how beautiful it is and no matter the potential of spurring action in a wide group of communities, societies and governments, the lack of prioritization leads people, I'm afraid, leads us into the risk that we're just running with open arms into our own demise.
Okay, that's well, I mean, obviously this is going to bit of thrown the cat among the pigeons a little bit there, Simon, which is exactly fantastic. I'll get the others to comment on that, but first, Noriko, let me ask you, from your perspective, what particular SDGs do you think are important and worth pursuing? Where are you active? You speak in Japanese, right? So please, folks, headsets on.
皆様こんにちは。ホーユージャパンアンバサダーを務めております三井のり子と申します。この SDGs の17の、開発ゴールなんですけれども、私は、このすべてが私たちの地球のために、またより良い世界を構築するためにすべてが重要だと思っております。でも個人的な意見を申し上げますと、そうですね、ゼロハンガー、飢餓をなくすということに私は一番力を入れてサポートしたいと思います。現在毎日2万人以上の方が、飢餓によって命を落としています。その4分の3が5歳未満の子どもたちです。こうして話している間にも5秒に1人の割合で飢えに苦しんで、命を絶つ人がいます。私たちは、先進国に生まれた私たちは温かいミルクと毛布が与えられることが当たり前になっていますが、発展途上国の国にとっては、私たちにとって当たり前のことが当たり前ではありません。一方、日本では食料の廃棄率が年間約1900万トン、この数字は、例えば7000万人の人が毎日食事をして1年間の量に匹敵する、ちょっと教育的な数字になっているんですけれども、片や、飽食で食べ物を捨てている、特に日本人は、賞味期限に対してとても敏感です。この食料の廃棄量というのは、家庭や飲食店での食べ残し、そしてスーパーやコンビニエンスストアで、賞味期限のものを、廃棄処分をしています。例えば、今日9月13日、7時に賞味期限が切れるとします。すると、もう13日の5時には、レジ、登録されていて、レジが通れなくなっています。賞味期限っていうのは本来、食べ物がダメになるという期限ではなく、美味しく食べれる期間ということで設けられているんですけれども、その5時の時点でもう販売ができないというのはちょっと過敏すぎるかなと思っています。そして そうですね、人は生まれた場所や環境によって、こんなにも格差があります。私はこの不公平な世の中を変えたいと思っています。なぜなら人は誰しも幸せに生きるという権利を持っているからです。私はこれをミッションとして、またホーユーを通じて、生涯この活動をサポートしていきたいと思っています。
Can I just ask you one question about the food issue? You support the zero hunger, but does the SDG framework help in that mission? Does it empower you in that mission?
はい、もちろん、皆さんの意識を高めるという点で、この17条の中に入っているというのはとても、意識を高めるという点においては貢献できると思っております。
Okay. So I mean, I want to sort of pick up that theme. Mikhail, you were nodding as Simon was speaking. So there are a lot of SDGs, there's a lot of confusion, but equally, isn't it true to say that having such a fine delineation allows all manner of people some kind of on-ramp to the idea of sustainability? Is there not value in the breadth of this prospect?
I wanted to share, and hopefully in doing so I will answer your question. I want to share a couple of perspectives on what Simon said. First of all, there was a study done recently that looked at the lack of alignment between how corporates, the SDGs that they choose to support, and what is actually needed as represented by what people actually are voting for. And I know an analysis like that can be flawed in many aspects, but it shows a huge misalignment, and it talks about these things that what actually needs funding and what needs doing is not the things that people are choosing to act upon. So that's the first thing. I tend to think of things a little bit differently than Simon, in the sense I also think prioritization is very important, but probably more because some of them are catalysts for the other ones. Because as Simon was alluding to, they're so intertwined, right? And looking at them in isolation doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I wanted to share some insight we got. So what we did is we went out to some of our private banking clients. We had an event with the next gen, so the young people who are tomorrow's future leaders, and we asked them how would they prioritize them. Specifically what we did, we said, if you had $100 million, how would you put the money to good use? And the rationale for why they choose some over the others was always about a catalyzation mechanism. So education was very high up because the belief was that if you did that, then a lot of other things would fall in place. And that might or might not be true, but the way of thinking about it, I think, is right. I think the way Simon's perspective is probably more that if we don't solve climate change, eventually all the other ones doesn't really matter because it's a key risk to do, right? So those are two slightly different perspectives on this.
Prasanna, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's all, no doubt climate change is very important. I think, there is every reason to really focus, but it's also at times how a particular country is prioritizing, so the SDGs. So I wish there's a better, way of, prioritizing, particularly by the governments, because often governments pick, some of the things which is close to them, and also based on the country needs, as well as that also translate into how you wanted to fund. So while I'm agreeing with Simon that better prioritization needed, I agree. But we are also working in a very complex place where even UN, I don't think, would be able to say, no, you need to prioritize this, because it's also looking at the sovereignty of the states and then the role of it. So it is from a very ideological point of view, it is ideal, but that's not necessarily the way how world works, so that's my view.
Well, you mentioned how governments engage with the subject, which comes back to the point you made earlier on. I mean, how do you conceive of this conversation from the perspective of the government involvement?
Well, I think this is exactly the type of conversation that governments were having with the United Nations and with their national stakeholders right after it was passed in the General Assembly. And that process has taken a long time until they finally are now reaching to a prioritized national agenda, right? Because you actually need to take the goals that are global and break them down into what's contextually needed. And that's where value judgments come in. So some countries might pursue climate change, some others are still not really ready to embrace the fact that climate change is happening, and are actually going back on previous commitments. I won't name the ones that have been talking about this. But I think there is a lot to be said about this nationalization, localization process. Priority setting actually requires a conversation with the stakeholders nationally or locally even on what's a priority and what isn't. The UN has a role in advising possibly, but it would never take the role of saying this is what you do here. So what I know UNDP is doing is to actually look at accelerators. So because it's such a complex framework and the money to go around is not enough to actually achieve it at this current rate, you need to look at what are the points where you touch this complex framework, you invest there, and you have a ripple effect throughout the agenda. So education is one of those. Educating girls is another one, right? Which has multiple multiplier effects around. Then also the one that I'm very involved in, the accountable and effective government institutions. If you improve how local governments do their job at the local level, you're likely to impact the delivery of local public services, which then has an impact on other SDGs. So
you say
accelerators are...
You say the SDGs are complex and you want to improve local governments at local level. That's a complex task. But Simon, just to the point then, coming back to the point that you made, is it not fair to say that this is the best that we could have hoped for? I mean, the SDG framework may not be ideal, but in the context of the complexity that we're talking about, were there any better options to go with?
Probably not. I think that, it's long been established that humans are unable to optimize anything we can satisfy, and that's pretty much the best we can hope for, both in our relationships, in any kind of engagement. So given the empirical realities of the world and the state of the world that we're in, and the asymmetries between different countries, different regions in terms of knowledge, natural resources, human resources, it's not, probably we can't do any better. If the world would be a single organization run by an AI that doesn't discount future generations excessively over the current generation, probably what would happen would be something that we would consider completely inhumane. Because it would, my assumption is that it would lead to the demise of maybe up to 40–50% of the current population. They say, like, in the long run of the planet, of the human species, this might be the most sensible solution from almost an amoral AI perspective. But we're not living in this world, so we have to...
Not yet.
Not yet, not yet. And hopefully, I would also say, hopefully we don't end up in this world. But I think that the risk of the lack of prioritization is that every SDG is deemed to be equally important, and in one way or another they are, but there is also, and this is my personal belief, there's this very simple analogy that if we think about 2 degrees increase in temperature, it's hard to make tangible for most people, but if you compare your own body temperature at 37 versus 39 degrees and see how that little change affects your cognitive ability, and you as a human being, as a body, you're an ecosystem. The planet is an ecosystem in a very similar way. And so 2 degrees is terrible. Yeah. Or maybe it's only a little spike at some point. Well, put your hand in the fire for 1 second, and you'll see what the repercussions are and the ripple effects of that.
So a need to emphasize the environmental aspect overall and prioritize. So I'm sure others have the different priorities, particularly if you come from a business perspective, if you come from a non-profit perspective. That's the whole point, isn't it? But let's wrap up then. You used the phrase "the best that we can hope for," so let's go with that, and let's wrap up with your final thoughts, guys. What is the best that we can hope for? What are your final thoughts, Mikkel?
I think the best you can hope for is that you get the transparency that is needed here. My biggest fear with these 17 SDGs is that they be used for greenwashing, social washing, whatever you call it. You retrofit what you do into saying, look at how great I am. if we had the rigor of saying, actually, this is not moving forward but backward, and we had the transparency to do that for all parties involved, I think that then the SDG starts to make sense. But until we have that transparency, it is just all too easy to make everything fit into one of the boxes, and therefore we all feel good about what we've done, where in reality we may not have done very much in aggregate.
Noriko, please share your final thoughts on the SDGs and our better future.
はい、SDG なんですけれども、いろんな課題がやっぱり今山積みになっていますが、一人一人自分たちが自覚を持って、そしてパッションを持って、取り組もうという気持ちがあれば、例えばホーユーなんですけれども、ホーユーは、SDG の17か条を、全て、サポートして、そのホーユーのプラットフォーム内で、参加していた皆さんが、直接ダイレクトにサポートができるシステムが整っております。ぜひ皆さんも、いろんな方法があると思うんですけれども、まず簡単に参加できる、ホイを通して、ダイレクトにサポートできるという方法をお勧めしたいと思います。
The Horyou platform is kind of interesting in this context because it does allow access to the entire diversity of humankind and every aspect of SDGs that they choose to prioritize on a personal basis. And in a way, the NGO world is similar, isn't it? I mean, we have a universe of NGOs, all of which have different priorities and address different parts of this equation. So from your perspective, Prasanna, what is the best that we can hope for? And is the SDG framework sufficient for purpose for the universe in which you operate?
I believe we need to have patience, and then also patience to go for the long run. Some of the things, as I said before, we might not be able to achieve in year 1 or year 2 or year 3. But let's not lose hope. I think that's key. It's very easy to be discouraged. It's very easy to look at how and where some of the governments even not prioritizing. But I believe humans are having such power to come together and then work and then achieve things. Biggest danger would be SDGs are for 15 years. We are in the 3rd year, and then we are sometimes overly too critical of the success, which we need to be really focusing. But I think we need to also to understand the importance of not lose hope and then work together.
Let me press you just for a second, if I could, because I want a positive message from you, Prasanna, because you, I think more than anybody on the panel, represent for the audience, or at least not you personally, but the NGO world and the organization that you represent and those that operate in your universe, are the most immediately accessible avenue for the members of the panel to sort of say, okay, I can start engaging with the agenda and with the ideas that we're discussing at this forum overall. So give me a message of hope for the audience. Say, yes, we can use the SDG framework, and you can somehow make a difference.
Yeah. I believe it is easy to see, somebody is going to do this, and then therefore this is somebody else's responsibility. But I think at some point we need to look at what my organization, what my institution, what my corporate, what I am as an individual can do. So in that sense, I really invite us to play our individual part as well. So sometimes we are so caught up with ideas, theories, but maybe sometimes we forget there's a role to play. Pick your charity, pick your project, pick the area that you can either contribute, either you can give your time and be part of it, or harness that collaboration. So this is not all about governments. This is not all about UN or NGOs. This is all about us as humanity. So let's work together. I think that would be my message.
Fantastic. Simon.
Yeah, let's also try to end on a positive note. So I think the points have been made before in terms of the importance of transparency in order to facilitate accountability and potentially also enable new ideas to emerge and to spread quicker, I think is incredibly important in this space. So if you think about better measurements of a variety of impacts at the social level, also at the environmental level, that can really spur a lot of innovation. And the capacity of, if there is one capacity of humanity besides potentially our ability to maintain hope in situations of despair, which is a fantastic capacity, is also our capacity to think in different ways and come up with new solutions. And I think what we've heard a little bit this morning already on the potential of blockchain, the potential of digital...
Should that have been an SDG? There should be another SDG category for blockchain.
No, please. The technology is not a solution, because I would assume that if we would have global governance that worked very efficiently, most of these problems could be solved very quickly, well, relatively quickly. The problems are managerial, our coordination, our government, our entrenched interests. But I think blockchain as a tool can change, or at least try to fundamentally change the way we interact, and can bring more transparency, can propose new models of coordination that are just being experimented with now, new models of governance that are relying on swarm intelligence rather than centralized decision-making. And potentially, this is exactly the tool we'll need, so that in 100 years people will look back and say, okay, this was one of the most important innovations, despite the incredibly negative impact of Bitcoin on the environment at the moment, but potentially the underlying technology will have helped us a lot in moving along on this trajectory. And it's not only blockchain. I mean, I think the potential of AI and big data and machine learning and all of these technologies in order to address some of these problems that potentially are outside of the grips of the human mind. I mean, I don't think we are quite there yet in understanding what the potential is, but we have to hope that some technological solution will play a big part in addressing the current situation.
Thank you. Arndt.
Well, there's an SDG number 17 on partnerships, which is probably the softest one in the mix, and maybe a little bit like if you had another one on technology, it could be sitting there as 18. I think partnerships is actually crucial, and we come back to this topic of collaboration. I think that every one of us is someone at an individual level. You can act at the organizational level, you can add more aggregates at the national level, and so on. If you think of yourself as an actor in this space, you can change your own behavior, you can influence that behavior of your organization, you can even influence the behavior of your nation. So there's a lot of power that rests with each one of us. And I think the vehicles that you can find to actually exercise that power are available to all of us. You just have to go online, you Google whatever, business and the SDGs, you'll find toolkits, you'll find guidance on how you engage with the SDGs. You will find opportunities to engage locally with your community. So I don't think there's a lack of possibilities to engage. I think that what is working a lot better with the SDGs than before is that people feel that they can connect. And I do think that then the breadth of goals is an advantage, because not everybody cares as passionately about the climate change one as you and me do. There are many people who care more about animals, and that's totally valid, right? So an invitation to all of you to look out for that hook that you might have individually or as a group, and then become active on the SDGs.
And the hooks are there, whether they be through commercial initiatives, as DBS is doing through their sustainability work, or on the NGO front, or even academically. Indeed. The hooks are there, and the engagement potential is there. So I agree with you. I mean, we should everyone should be looking for those. Folks, please show your appreciation for our SDG panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A fascinating discussion.
Thanks, Timo.
We'll maintain the SDG theme. In a moment, we'll be moving on to another one of the SDGs, and at the risk of being a little bit... Thank you, panel. At the risk of dwelling too much on the lesser important ones, Simon, per your comments, there are... Thanks, Frank. No, thank you so much. Cheers for coming. We're going to focus in on one of the SDGs in particular, because it is a particularly important, not necessarily SDG per se, but it's a particularly important topic of conversation in modern day culture. The norms surrounding the issues of gender are beginning to be tested in many ways, and mostly in a positive way. The testing process has led us to some interesting conversations. So we're going to spend the next panel session and the next conversation talking about SDG 5, which is the subject of gender equality and how we should be considering that. We have a keynote speaker coming up, and we're just waiting for her to come in, actually, so I'll just keep talking just for a moment. Sorry to bore you with my, with my continued presence. Let me just remind anyone, if you've lost a stylus for your Samsung Note, come and see me later on, because I've got it right here in my pocket. So, SDG 5, advocating gender equality and diversity. Our keynote speaker on this is going to come up in a minute. Josie Ho is a singer and actress from Hong Kong. She's with us today to talk about bliss energy and how it can make a difference and be the motivation for everything. And if they show her in any moment, then we'll get underway. Our panel to discuss it later on after that will involve Hayden Majajas of Bloomberg, Stephanie Dixon, who is the founder of Green is the New Black, Josie Ho herself, and we'll talk about the value of gender equality. Jonathan, do we have our keynote speaker? 2 minutes. Okay, 2-minute break, ladies and gentlemen. I'll introduce Josie Ho when she comes in. Have a glass of water, ponder the SDGs. Okay, folks, we'll push on with our next SDG agenda. The diversity agenda, SDG number 5. Before we get to the panel conversation on this, we're going to have a presentation by our guest of honor, Josie Ho, singer and actress. She's going to talk about bliss energy at the blink of an eye. It's our motivation for everything. Please welcome Josie Ho.
Okay, it's going to get a little bit hard to get on stage with these heels. Hi, everybody. I'm Josie Ho. I'm an actress and singer and a film producer from Hong Kong. And I'm here to share my experience of finding bliss with you. My documentary, Finding Bliss, our nature's state of being is bliss. Bliss is a state of supreme happiness that everyone consciously or unconsciously strives for. If we need to strive for bliss, then we're not in our natural state. From birth, your bliss is slowly retarded by life experiences until the bliss is so retarded, you die. How do we get back to our natural state? One of the most powerful tools for bliss is opening one's own inner self. One of the tools that I learned is to gain a more deeper understanding of yourself by opening yourself to humor, ridicule. During Chinese New Year this year, I asked a legendary Hong Kong comedian Jim Chim to help set up some workshop sessions in finding bliss. Jim studied under the great French clown master, well, he's a master of clown in France, Philippe Gaulier. Gaulier is renowned and profound for his ridicule. Nothing better to get your inner layers. Gaulier's disciples includes people like Sacha Baron Cohen, Emma Thompson, Helena Bonham Carter, Jim Chim, and of course myself. Hong Kong people are very conservative when it comes to their personal feelings. So I thought it would be interesting to invite some people that are more quiet and reserved in their private lives to come out and find their bliss during these sessions called le jeu, which means to play. So I invited my band, the Uni Boys. We're originally called Josie and the Uni Boys. Legendary Hong Kong rapper from LMF, MC Yan, legendary Hong Kong hardcore singer Jen from a hardcore band called Chiu Hong, and 3 underprivileged kids from the TLC Chicken Soup Foundation to Iceland to have some fun, while in the process finding a bit of bliss along the way. When they heard Iceland, everyone asked why all the way to Iceland to find bliss. Well, it's the land of fire and ice, shock treatment. Hong Kong to Iceland, shock treatment. Le jeu to ridicule, shock treatment. And a note, fire and ice in Hong Kong means a blowjob technique, shock treatment. Anyway, you get the idea. One of the sessions we did was to have participants stand at the back of the room with audience at the front. The aim of the game is to reach the audience. You can only step forward if you think someone in the audience likes you. Do you feel that? Okay. You keep stepping until you reach the audience. This is where the ridicule begins to flow. Definitely needs a thick skin. Gaulier can make anyone cry with his barrage of insults. Luckily, we had Jim, who has Asian sensibilities. Asians don't have very thick skin, so everyone always needs space. The other game we played was a game called Funny Eyes. The goal of the game is to make your partner laugh by greeting them in a funny demeanor. Through this, Jim taught us how to get in touch with our humorous side. The game is especially good for the group because it was able to break down the cool Asian demeanors we had on board, especially the rockers. One of the highlights of the trip was talking gibberish with the locals, Icelandic people. 2 totally diverse cultures through gibberish connected the whole Hong Kong and Icelandic fire and ice experience, finding bliss. Was rounded up with a mega jam between the Hong Kong musicians and Icelandic musicians. Wong Fei Hong meets Thor. Have any one of you here heard the theme song of Wong Fei Hong in Hong Kong? Thank you. Okay, we did that song and we did a Viking song, and we have meshed these 2 songs together, Chinese rocker musicians and Icelandic rock musicians. So I wish I can bring some sound bites with me today, but it's still been in editing, so I couldn't bring it. I hope you'll see it one day. And then, well, we've learned that a sincere attitude by having a sincere attitude can allow fun ideas to happen. We truly express our mind with no holdbacks, in which one class we learn to greet each other with our eyes, as the funny eyes, which brings our spirit into a more humorous status. Through this, the chemistry amongst the group blossomed. My teacher, Jim Chim, teach me through games, because playing games can develop wisdom and joy. We believe that only pleasure brings intellectual compassion. I think that the most interesting part is that where I have to allow myself to make a fool out of myself and sincerely allow others to laugh at me and vice versa. I find that this knowledge engaging into my work and life, because once I open up with my humorous self, I have nothing more to lose. No hands tied, no shying away from strangers. Sometimes being a clown, it makes others happy. And once we're happy, well, being a clown, it makes others happy, and you can also enjoy the pleasure of making people happy. Once we are happy, things get done. Things are motivated, and when we're happy and free, we are invincible. So, guys, why so serious? Why so serious? And then I want to share with you this other game that I briefly talked about in above, about the wisdom of how to find joy and happiness throughout these games. In games, we learn to open up. Let's let go. In games, we learn to open up, let go of our fears, and accept yourself for what you are. Make fun of your own weakness. I think that's the hardest part. There was a game of learning how popular we are amongst the class or from our audience. We have to stand, 11 of us, we have to stand in the back of the room in front of our audience. We have to use our senses to feel if the audience likes us. And if we feel so, we may take one step up. The person who reaches the crowd first wins. Teacher plays the judge in the room. If you fake a like and step up, you'll be punished and you'll be sent back to the back of the line. It is a very complex game where you have to really watch, sense, and listen to the crowd, whether if they're giving you reactions like clapping, cheering, or paying any attention to you at all, or even if you touch anybody at all. Because 11 of us stand out there, we're not supposed to take a step and peek into what others are doing, which makes it even harder. To make it brief, it's a critical game. Most fearful thing is that your performance don't touch anyone at all and isn't attractive. But you have to eat it, and you have to deal with yourself at that moment and accept it. But teacher always has an answer to cheers you on. You are happy. You have to be generous enough to pass this game. And this is all. This is all we learn. This is all we learn from Iceland. And there are some more. There are 80 minutes of the documentary that I shot that I wish I can bring it all the clips and show you today, but we don't have enough time for that. So anyway, my conclusion is I hope that this world will change and everybody relax and just chill. Be a clown. It makes others happy, as well as you can enjoy the pleasure of making people happy. Once everybody is happy, things get motivated. We feel free. We are invincible. So guys, don't be so serious. Chill. Thank you.
Josie, thank you. Please take a seat.
Okay.
We're going to talk a little bit more about some of your experiences and
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about SDG 5, women's equality and gender diversity. Please,
That's some
please,
heavy stuff.
Please take a seat. Well, we can chill about that.
Where would you like me to sit?
That's absolutely fine. The issue of gender equality is not just an SDG issue. It's a societal and commercial issue as well that we're discussing in many different. Proud today on this panel to have a couple of very empowered women who can talk about the. Is the founder of a movement in Singapore called Green is the New Black and the Wedge Asia. Stephanie, please join us. To talk about those women who are as yet not quite as empowered and successful as our guests, let me invite Pia Bruce, who's Executive Director on the National Committee for UNIFEM and who has spent a long time working for the empowerment and equality of women in various contexts. Pia, please join us. Say again?
Senior advisor, but thank you.
Apologies.
Yeah. No.
Nice to see you. And just to push the idea of gender equality and all-round inclusiveness, we're going to have a man on this panel as well. But this is not just any old man. Hayden is a man who, from the South China Morning Post, got an award as being an empowerer of women. Hayden Majajas is with Bloomberg. Thank you for being with us. Tell us a little bit about this award as you take your seat. What does that mean?
I'm more behind the stage kind of guy. I don't really like praise and glory. But no, just I'm the head of diversity at Bloomberg, and I do a lot of work with various organizations that empower women in Asia Pacific. So that was very kindly recognized a few years back.
That's fantastic. All right. Well,
It's okay, I won't clap.
thank you. I mean, it's good to have a man on the panel because, you know, it gives us a little bit of
I'm
balance.
glad I qualify as a man.
I love your shoes.
Thank you.
Pia, let me begin with you, if I might. I mean, with the last panel, I'm not sure if you managed to catch the whole of it. The last panel, we talked about the SDGs as a general prospect. Tell us about SDG 5 and tell us about your experiences with regards to gender equality and within the framework of the SDGs.
Sure. So, of course, I'd like to make a plug for SDG 5, which is gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, being a completely transformational SDG for a lot of the other ones. I think the previous panel was talking about catalyst. So if you look at no poverty, zero hunger, good education, health, water and sanitation, and of course, 5, gender equality. I'd say that by improving gender equality and empowerment of women, you're going to have a great effect on the others as well. Research has shown that when women have decision-making powers, be it in the family, community, at a country level, economic empowerment to contribute either by earning or even leading an organization, the country and the community will do better. And the next generation will most likely have greater outcomes than otherwise would have been on the top SDGs and beyond. So UN Women globally is saying planet 50-50 by 2030. They're realizing that, all right, that's a tough call. It may not really happen to that effect, but they're launching 12 flagship programs across the world to speed things up, and I'm happy to continue on that.
Well,
later.
I want you to tell me a little bit about why is this important?
Why gender equality is important? Well, first of all, it's half of humanity. If you want to build the greatest world going forward, diversity of any sort has proven to increase outcomes for corporations and for any congregation. And if half the world's population does not have equal access to productive resources or decision-making, you're simply not going to reach as far as you potentially could by half.
Hayden, the reason that is often given for the fact that there are not half, that equality is not evident in all aspects of our lives, is the structural impediments, most of them imposed by men. What can men do to bring about SDG 5 and the kind of world that we're talking about?
I think the same thing anybody can do, which is get more voices into the conversation. I mean, when you ask me that question, I immediately think of a role that I was in previously in oil and gas. And a big proportion of that industry is moving hydrocarbons around the world in big freight ships. And when I joined that industry, I was really shocked to hear that female representation among seafarers, women at sea or people who work at sea, was 0.03%. And I thought, that's crazy. Like, why is female representation 0.03%? And when I stepped foot on one of these vessels, one of these freighters, you realize instantly, they were never designed with women in mind. There's not even a bathroom for women on these ships. Never. Until, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, the first ship started coming out of the shipyards in Korea that finally have facilities for women. But if you think about it, and to answer your question, what can men do about this? What can anybody do about it? Is think about what barriers you're creating by just going with the default. Because in that situation, there were no women to be seen, and so nobody thought to create facilities for women. Therefore, it doesn't attract women. Therefore, women are not going to consider that as part of their careers. Therefore, the shipping schools are not going to attract young girls. No one ever talks about it. It just furthers the stereotype. So I think getting more people into that conversation, I think, is critical. And
but that whole chicken and egg situation you're describing there is a very hot potato in political terms these days, and addressing that is problematic. And I want to get onto that subject in a second, but let me just allow Stephanie a word here. I mean, Stephanie and I were talking at lunchtime about representation. And Stephanie does a lot of events, and I do a lot of events. And I said to her, when I sit down with a panel and I do TV shows around panels, we find it very hard to find women. And Stephanie goes, I don't have a problem. There is a strange environment in which the situation that you present has an impact upon the people that are attracted to it. Steph, just tell us a little bit about how you go about things and the role of women in what you do, because as far as you're concerned, in your universe, women are empowered, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it was a very interesting conversation, and you were just so confirmed that no, there was no women that we were able to easily find, but really, I think most of our speakers that we bring together are actually women. And I don't know if that's just because we're living in an echo chamber a little bit in our sustainability world, and in the conscious living space, there's a lot of women coaches, there's a lot of women who are really leading the change and really care about sustainability. I've had conversations about this with a lot of people, and there's that mothering nature that we have that kind of tends to come out in these situations where we want to do good for others, we want to do good for the planet. And so, we've really kind of not struggled to find really good women in this space to discuss these kind of issues. And I think it's always good, though, to have that balance and to get different perspectives. So, yeah.
Josie, we're not just talking about equality, we're talking about diversity. And as we're talking, I'm suddenly aware that you're the only Asian on this panel. Tell me about the cultural aspect to this conversation.
Well, Asians, I don't know if I can speak on behalf of Asians because I'm from Hong Kong, and we're multi-diverse, but
certainly one of the more cosmopolitan environments. Yeah,
yes,
sure.
but lying in the bottom of the heart, Hong Kong people are very conservative, and we don't find a problem with this. but I'm trying, I'm one of them who is trying to contribute to this change. To say a couple of years ago, I shot a film called Dream Home. It was about a girl who spent all her money. Her dream is to get this tiny apartment so that her family can live peacefully, and she ended up screwing up the whole thing, and she couldn't get it. So she clicked, and she went crazy. She went killing 11 people, including a pregnant woman, just to get that apartment. So we have in Hong Kong, usually females don't get to lead a movie, and in this case, we have not only made a female lead this movie, we have made her an anti-hero.
How did that go down?
And it's a true, if you ask, the film was widely received in Hong Kong because it's the truth. Even the government was talking about it. Our real estate property prices are unimaginable. It's impossible for youngsters to buy any estates nowadays.
Pia,
Yeah.
your work in this part of the world, tell me how the cultural aspect impacts and do the priorities of the SDGs, which are by and large the expressions of more Western cultures than Eastern ones. So tell me about how that imbalance, if you like, or that conflict, such that it is.
Well, in any country or region of the world, there is going to be a balance and a dynamic equilibrium, if you will, between what could be considered human rights and culture. In Singapore, during the 14 years I've spent here, I'd say that the progress has been quite good on the issues where we work. Still lots to do, but anything from, migrant workers, in the business community, maybe in particular, interest in figuring out ways to bring women to the top, to retain women during their childbearing years, and secure the pipeline going forward. So we have found, for instance, that UN Women has a couple of instruments. The Women Empowerment Principles, which is the set of guidelines that companies can use to make sure that they remember all the aspects important for keeping women happy and for a long time within the workforce. We launched the He for She Impact Awards in Singapore, and I must make a plug for Bloomberg here, actually, for looking out for women news leaders that they can bring to interviews and bring on air. Good work there. So we find actually an enormous interest from the business community, and we realize that even if you want to move forward, even when you want to move forward, there's a lot of competition. You have to make sure that what you do is efficient and good, and you get everybody's input, etc. So, Singapore is a conservative society as well. Being Swedish to start with, though I haven't lived there for about 20 years, I'd say so. But there is good progress, and we have hope. I have another colleague with me here as well, Madhavi. I think she agrees.
There is I don't know to what extent our audience has been paying attention to the conversations going on in mainstream media in the West, but there is a Canadian gentleman called Jordan Peterson, who's been making a bit of a name for himself recently, a bit of controversy, because he brings to the fore the argument that you alluded to a moment ago, Hayden. He posits that perhaps some of the gender imbalance in certain circumstances is the result of actual expressed preference rather than barriers to entry. So the point that you were making about ships not being appropriate for women is simply because women don't want to go on tanker ships.
Well, they're smarter, yeah.
So, I mean, that debate is very heated right now. I don't want to rehash the debate and try and find an answer to it, but how do we respond in this context? What's the appropriate way to behave in the light of these conversations?
Well, for me, it's quite different. So I'm the head of diversity and inclusion at Bloomberg, and Bloomberg's business is about bringing transparency to information and data. It's about businesses who have access to more data and investors who have access to more data make better decisions. Better decisions mean you make more money. More money means you pay more taxes, you employ more people. Ultimately, it's about better communities and better countries. So when you think about it from that perspective, the data is what's helping the world become a better place. From my perspective, because I'm looking at this from a very commercial perspective, anybody who sits down next to me and says, why should we talk about gender? I just look back at them and say, this is about making more money. This is about your business performing better. If you don't want to have a conversation about your business performing better, then this probably isn't the right company for you, because we're here to make money. So I think it might be different in another organization, but that's precisely what it's
all about framing, right?
Exactly,
yeah.
And that's what my job is. I mean, ultimately, I'm driving innovation. This is about stopping groupthink. Groupthink happens in particular when a group is homogenous. For example, all men around the table. The great thing about that is you're going to get a really quick decision because there's groupthink. We're going to get there really quickly, and the idea is going to get through, and we're all going to pat ourselves on the back. When you have a diverse group, it's a bit more uncomfortable. You have to take into account different ideas and different opinions. But ultimately, you'll get more than one idea, more than one solution. And the research shows that 2/3 of the time, you'll be successful. compared to groupthink, which leads to success only roughly 50% of the time. So simple things like that, explaining to leaders how embracing D&I helps your business perform better. If there's anybody who doesn't want to listen to that, then they're not acting commercially. If they're not acting commercially and operating in a commercial manner, there's no space for them in business.
Josie?
I have a really retarded suggestion, because I'm an actress and I work on the set all the time. It's not very female friendly, because there's only one thing, I think. It's just one thing. If they can fix that thing, we're fine with it. It's the washroom condition. Like the showers and the washroom, it can be clean. If you can if you can separate men's washroom and women's, I think that we will be very, women tend to respect the toilet a lot. So it will be kept clean, and maybe that might be able to change, a simple thing to change the situation, wouldn't it?
I think there's plenty of things that can be done in the office around accessibility, for example, that isn't just related to gender. And I think cleanliness links to things like respect.
Bathrooms are not related to gender, so I've been to plenty of men's bathrooms, which have been just
Trust me, it's the most important thing.
But look, I want to just for a second flip this conversation around and look at it from a slightly different perspective, because the idea of empowerment, surely, is not necessarily applied only to women. If we put aside the pure statistics and talk about the idea of empowerment for male and female, we're having a similar conversation, but maybe a slightly more positive one, isn't it? Stephanie, the work that you do focuses a lot on empowerment, of growth, of self-betterment, and it applies to men just as much as women, doesn't it? I mean, that message is getting a lot of resonance all over the world, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone, not everyone, I'm not going to generalize that much, but a lot of people really are now investing in their growth, in their personal development. I think it's something that maybe wasn't as prevalent, generations past, but with the access to the amount of information that we have, the amount of events like in Singapore as well, and just thought leaders who are actually now coming out on very niche and specific topics, I think is providing a lot of avenues for people to figure out where, or to be drawn to different aspects that they want to improve in their lives, that they want to empower themselves on, skill sets that they feel like they haven't had access to before, that they want to be able to work on. I think it's a very exciting time for that level of empowerment. And as you said, we do a lot of work in that space to really empower individuals to be more green, to be more sustainable, and just realize that actually it's very simple and easy and can be broken down into little steps. And I think a lot of it comes down to that idea that it can be overwhelming, but when things are broken down into smaller pieces and people are empowered to take one step at a time, then those big issues become much smaller and more palatable. And I think that can kind of be used across the board.
Another way of breaking it down into a slightly different perspective, Pia, is that most of these conversations are held in the context, again, of Western priorities. Why are there not more women on the boards of multinational corporations? Why are there not more women leading discussions in major international fora? Shouldn't we actually be spending a bit more time talking about why are women in third world nations not getting better access to healthcare, childcare, and that kind of stuff? Should we not actually be talking about gender equality in the places where it really makes a much bigger difference, and that is the poorer countries of the world?
Absolutely. And actually, though UN Women has a global mandate, the majority of the work is actually carried out in less developed countries of the world when it comes to the basic SDGs, and also coordinating the whole of the UN's work when it comes to the gender equality lens. So while the national committees, such as we are, would talk more about women on boards, women's representation in leadership, equal pay, which is another campaign, global campaign, the actual work of UN Women is very much done on the ground. That was the mandate of all UNIFEM as well. Now, UN Women globally always say, everybody's talking about gender equality. But if you look at the funding that governments actually are providing towards gender equality worldwide, it's really a drop in the ocean compared to what the other UN agencies would get. And what I also hear, not from UN Women, but more generally, is that people claim that when it comes to a gender equality debate, sustainability, environmental impact, and so on, corporations have, in the last decades, gotten so much extra power, especially in countries with resource-weak governments, that having them contribute their bit to the SDGs, supposed to be a collaborative effort, is extremely, extremely important going forward as well.
So let's wrap up the session then with a look at what can be done. I want you each to sort of think for a moment and prioritize, what does gender equality and diversity mean in your context? And what measures are necessary to achieve the things that you think need to be achieved?
Now?
You don't...
Well, I have a few ideas, but maybe you'll find it too simple and you have already thought about it. But I would think to give more education, provide more education for women, and to give them more jobs. Don't be afraid to give them jobs of leaders like teachers or as a manager or CEO of a company, because women are a little bit different from men. They tend to think more, they tend to have a more complex thinking, and they would treat things very softly. And that's why deals gets done. And they're more emotionless when it comes to work. And I think that I still stick with the toilet one. For real. For
Step
real.
one, equalize the toilet.
I experienced it every day. I go to work and we share toilets. And it's just that 2 minutes of a day that is so unpleasant that it doesn't make me want to stay on the set and work. Maybe if they ask me to do overtime, I'll be like, no, I don't like the toilet. I can't stand it anymore. It's ridiculous. If they can set it up to have like a female section for the toilets, and even with a shower, which is maybe too much to ask for, it would be wonderful. I think all the girls would say, oh, no problem.
This is a message we should take to the airlines, because when you get on a plane, that's a real issue. Stephanie, equality and diversity. What should we do?
Yeah, so I think coming from our perspective, we work with a lot of social enterprises and social entrepreneurs, and the same things and kind of issues come up quite time and time again, and I'm sure it's no stranger to the people in this room as well, is investing in women. And these, social entrepreneurs, they want to invest, they want to grow their businesses, but they don't have the confidence, or they've tried and got shut down. And I think just nurturing that group and figuring out more ways to really invest in women in this space, and invest in diversity groups. There's so many incredible ideas and social enterprises within Singapore and within Asia that I think they're just not getting access to the kind of investment and support that they need. So from my perspective, I'd love to see more focus on that, and especially sort of within the Singapore market, really seeing how those women and people in this space could sort of get that ecosystem support and not have to struggle so much to find it. I think that would be something that would really
Let me just ask you one quick follow-up question, because you are our millennial representative. You're the diversity component on the panel today is the young woman, the millennial representative. Do you see a difference in people 30 and below in terms of their approach to gender issues?
It's a big question. Let me just think for a moment. So I just don't think it's as prevalent. I think I don't see the barriers in that sense. So when we're working, it's not like gender comes up. It's not like this is a conversation that we're having, I think.
So men of your generation are much less obnoxious than men of my generation.
I don't know if I can generalize or support that statement.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Hayden, I mean, this is your work, right? I mean, this is what you dedicate yourself to doing. So what are your top tips for furthering SDG 5?
Well, I want to take a very different track. I want everybody to talk to your young girls in the same way that you talk to young boys. Encourage girls to go into STEM. Encourage them to be excited at mathematics and science and technology, and give them the tools that will excite them. Give them Lego blocks, or the Dice or Hyakuen shop version of blocks. These are the kinds of ways that we will start changing the stereotypes that are inbuilt into our cultures. We need to move away from giving girls just toys, dolls to play with, and giving boys trucks and blocks. It's a simple thing to do, but it will have a big impact in the next 10, 15 years.
But this kind of, at an individual level, that's a great thing to say, but is that where the impact is had? I mean, Josie was talking about the situation on film sets, for instance. If we're sitting there and putting our children in front of television shows that continually reinforce those gender roles, doesn't matter what mum and dad say, because everybody is being brainwashed with those things. Shouldn't you be focusing your efforts at the big picture players who are putting out these messages?
You've got to start everywhere. You only gave me a choice to give one response. As my one response, if we had half an hour, I'd give you 50. I really want us to focus a lot more on the younger generation, because we have to change stereotypes to begin with. But at the same time, I can tell you, I'm working in the corporate space to do all that I can. And then we've got other industries represented here as well. But we have to be everywhere with that conversation.
Okay, Pia, your priorities and...
So I grew up with trucks and Lego blocks, among other things. So thank you, yeah. So what STEM, to me, represents is just one area of the future. So what we're trying to make sure is essentially that women, which in this case we're representing, have all avenues to go to the high growth and have an interest in the high growth areas of the future. Other than getting exposed early to the subject matter, is also being able to find role models out there. And that plays into the diversity question. Well, somebody who is from the same background as me, looks like me, I can relate to in one way or another. You could also cast that as, and that would probably be my one contribution, all about choice for young women growing up, but young men growing up as well. Which is, you don't have to choose one way or the other, but you should have the opportunity to make your choice, whichever way, full knowing what the positive and negative consequences of your choice will be. Thank
Fantastic. You. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Our gender diversity panel, please show your appreciation. Thank you very much, panel. SDG 5, an ongoing conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Time for our group photograph. Folks, please do. And if our next panel would prepare themselves. Thank you very much, panel. So, ladies and gentlemen, we touched earlier on this morning, very briefly in passing, in the Sustainable Cities panel and elsewhere, about the issues of aging and health. Aging people require more healthcare, requires more planning, requires more thinking within the development of our urban environments and our cities. So our next panel is called MedTech, Disruptive Health Innovations for Inclusive Care. The good news, folks, is that I will not be moderating this panel, so you get a break from me. So I'll invite the moderator, Ro Charles, of the Executive Board of Vickers Venture Partners, to come up onto the stage and introduce his panel and kick off this conversation. Ro, are you there? He's just putting on his microphone. He'll be up very shortly. Disruptive health innovations for inclusive care, which is a subject that the Singapore government is taking very seriously, and the demographic time bomb in Asia, in Japan in particular, is causing an enormous amount of conversation all around the world. So I'll step down from the stage and wait for Ro to come along and introduce his panel. Oh, did I? All right. Before we do that, then let's. I promised you earlier on, folks, that we'd give you an indication of how blockchain and music interact, and how music can play a part in introducing interesting technologies that are harder to access. And we have, in order to do that, our crypto musical specialist who's going to play a little bit of music for you. Emerson Gale, please.
Thank you. Very good, sir. Very good, very good. Hello. All right. Hello. Can we all hear me? La la la. This is good. How are we feeling? How you feeling out there? All right. All right. We got a very good. I said, how you feeling? Okay, this is great. So I have 5 minutes to do a presentation. That was going to be 10. So it might be a little fast. There's going to be some new terms. If you don't understand, feel free to come up to me later, research them online, hit me up. This is the opening of many conversations, I hope. So here we go. I'm part of the MedTech theme here, and I'm approaching it from the angle of music therapy. Okay? And who am I? Emerson Gale, that's what they tell me anyways. And I'm representing Crypto Musical. It's a YouTube channel that I founded and produced. We write music for Blockchain for Social Good project. That's why I'm here today. Yeah, SDGs, woohoo! Can I hear it? Woohoo! This is good. We're building the energy, stoking the flames. Okay, the time has started. Here we go. So let's quickly move on to wherever my clicker is. Or not. I get 30 more seconds because of that. Thank you. Okay. But music, I mean, what? It's just like playing ukulele in the woods. Like, how does this relate to, why does this really matter? Why does it matter? Okay. Well, for one, yeah, the principle of tensegrity. Has anyone heard of it? Raise a hand. So this is a Buckminster-Fuller principle, the balance of tension and integrity. We now know in biology that the cellular membrane is best akin to a vibrating network of strings. So, in music therapy, some of our best research coming out of Columbia, Stanford, these such institutions, is that in fact, music can be very pivotal to our health, and no wonder most of us listen to it on a daily basis is because we resonate with it easily. Okay? So I'm going to talk about, really quickly, how music will help us overcome a lot of our current mental illnesses like depression and a general culture of separation, post-industrial era. Many of us are alienated from our own bodies, from a sense of place and meaning and ability to do self-care. Here we go. Boom. So Nada Yoga, this is nothing new, y'all. This is ancient stuff. Sound science has been going on for a while. Really quick, can all of you just put a hand up here? Everyone put a hand up here. This is good. Okay. And I want you all to say, uh-huh, uh-huh. Whoa, do you feel something? Uh-huh. Do you feel something? Uh-huh. That's, have some control over. You can self-regulate using music as a medicine. You don't need to take a pill. It's free. All right, and we'll get to the SDGs related to this in one mo. Actually, a few seconds. I got to go faster. Here we go. So, really quickly, we're going to try a tone together. So, everyone just relax your limbs a little bit. We're coming from here. And this is the tone, if you're feeling depressed, you tend to hunch over. This is an ah tone, right? That would be the heart chakra right there, Nada Yoga. And you can aim this here when you're having difficulties in those regards and notice some difference. Okay? So, relaxing, we're coming from here. And let's just put an ah out there. See how long we can extend it. Okay, deep breath. And then out. Let's try one more. Put your hands up here. Feel this effect right here. Very immediate. 1, 2, 3. Wow. All right. How do we feel? Anyone? Quick responses. Popcorn style. How do you feel? Feeling good. All right. Yeah. Well, use these techniques. There's A, E, I, O, or U. You can use other vowels and other parts of your body to help out with other organs. So, have fun and be well. So the study of intervals, so that was, more Eastern esoteric. We have the Western side, Pythagoras codified what are intervals for something like violin. So, for example, you have the major and minor third. Okay, major third tends to be an uplifting emotion, minor third, a downward. So I'll just quickly illustrate on the violin what intervals mean. And this is a process, most of music, we don't think about it, but it is actually a framework for our psychological development. So really quickly, major third. Right? Okay, that was major feeling. Minor third. Now my rhythm was different, but there was also a different effect. Yes or no? Yeah, yes or no? I like this audience involvement. Also, but this was nothing new. Way before the Greeks, most of us in indigenous tribes all around the world were singing. It's just that these powers have been removed from us. Music's been politicized and controlled because it's very powerful, understandably. This is nothing new, okay? Sound is our life. Music's actually our birthright. Why? How do I know that you're all musical? Because probably half of you say, I can't sing, I'm not musical. Why? What's going on right here? A rhythm. To talk, you have to use harmonics. You're already musical. Sorry if to disappoint if you wanted to be not musical. But not just us. Our world is musical. What does that say about our world? If music is one of the reasons that we have godlike powers, that we are profound, we can self-regulate, what does that say about our world? A lot of different interesting implications. But what does this mean? We used to be a world we would hear the fellow creatures. Now we're not hearing them anymore. And we hear the sounds of the city. How is this affecting us? No wonder we have these mental illnesses, right? We need the chance to hear the species we used to be hearing. So one of my biggest mentors, I'm going to finish, 30 seconds. Okay, it's Bernie Krause. He has this huge library of wilderness soundscape habitat resources, all right? Now, we are using various blockchain use cases to make sure that this is forever stored and that all of humanity for the rest of history will have access to many of these habitats which have already disappeared, he caught in the 70s before they went. Okay, so I'm working with Bernie Krause right now in a field called soundscape ecology, which we can measure the health of habitats based on the actors within them. The higher diversity, as you expect, you have a greater health of a habitat, and they show up like a little sonogram like this, okay? All right, so what does this relate to? Well, just now you had Sustainable Development Goals 13, so it improves our ability, our attention, our focus, and it also improves gender relations. Hey, good times. And some other helpful SDGs. Big fans. Okay, so finally, about to finish here, we see these applications showing up in a variety of different places. Oops, didn't hear that. Okay, we've already been implementing these in schools, these 3 minutes of wilderness habitat sound recording in the first few minutes of a school with some great effects across China, in the UK and the US. But we're looking for partners globally. We're also taking expeditions to other parts of the world so that people can have localized sound recordings that are relevant to them. If you're interested in partnering with us or funding some of these soundscape ecology expeditions, please be in touch. Prisons, you can see the obvious use cases. So I'm done. If you want to be in touch about any of this, and also the digital arts for kids thing where kids can upload their music from anywhere around the world and receive cryptocurrency payments that smart contract releases to them when they're 18 so they can work their way out of poverty with just access to a keyboard and their own inspiration. If you're interested in any of these projects, please reach out to me. Telegram, WeChat, real person, also email. What's up? Hope this has been good. Cheers.
More than good, Emerson. Fantastic, fantastic, unique perspective on the whole thing. Best of luck. Thank you very much. Okay, so how do you follow that? Ro, I'm sorry, are we going to dump you in it? The next stage is going to be a little more prosaic than that last one, but nonetheless interesting. I'm going to introduce Ro Charles, who is the Vice President of Vickers Venture Partners, to talk about MedTech, disruptive health innovations for inclusive care. Ro, please.
All right, so thank